Hi, I'm Andrew.
And I'm Dave, and we're the IB English guys. Today we want to talk about prose fiction. We love fiction, and we want to analyze and interpret a passage.
Yeah, that's right. Prose fiction really gives us insight into characters, their motivations, their actions. We can learn a lot about real human behavior by exploring literary characters. Mr. Giles, today I think we're going to look at a passage from The Great Gatsby, and I believe we have an acronym.
Yeah, we do. We like acronyms or some way for an entry point for us to take a look at different text types and literary forms. And our acronym is Scasny. It's an adaptation of a common acronym, and we like this. It's a great way to look at any fiction passage.
Okay, Scasny. Mr. Giles, in this case, the S is going to stand for setting. We want to pay close attention to the setting of literary works. Why has the author made that choice? Is it in a small house? Is it in a large city? Is it in an expansive field? All these choices will give us insight into themes and characters.
Yeah, we love that. Time and place, and we want to think carefully about time and place and setting. We also think about characters. That's the C in Scasny. The characters in a literary work obviously are the people that come to life. They have actions, and we want to think about how are they described? How do they speak? What are their inner thoughts? How are they developed over the course of a novel or in a particular passage?
Yeah, that's fantastic. Now, you mentioned action, and A for Scasny actually is action. And we want to think about that plot line. We want to think about, the conflict that starts the action. We want to think about the rising action and how the character is behaving, the falling action, and of course, the resolution. And how is the author manipulating pacing and characterization through that character's action.
Yeah, and if we're looking at a passage, we're thinking about what are the characters doing in this passage? How do I talk about the action? That's important. We also think about S. The next S is style. So any literary passage or any literary work, the author is making choices. These are all the choices that they're making. So we're thinking about the style of their writing. We're thinking about the use of figurative language. We're thinking about the imagery. We're thinking about the dialogue. This is all part of the style of a passage.
That's right. Now, additionally, the N from Scasny, we want to think about the narrative point of view. Is the narrator writing in first person? Is it third person limited? Is it third person omniscient? And how does this authorial choice sort of control the narrative and shape what the reader's able to see and understand? So we want to think about who's talking and what's the narrative point of view.
Yeah, this is something that we added because we think that narrative point of view is so important. The I in Scasny is ideas. We're thinking about what are the rich ideas? What's the so what of this passage that I can take away? There might be several different ideas or themes that are big concepts or global issues that really stand out to us when we read a passage.
Yeah, and think about the relationship between those ideas. Really go for some complex ideas. Okay, Mr. Giles, we're guessing most of our viewers have seen The Great Gatsby or have read The Great Gatsby or have some knowledge, but if they haven't, give us a quick overview.
Yeah, so this is why we chose this passage, because we know it's a widely taught, widely read text. The Great Gatsby was written in 1925 by F. Scott Fitzgerald. It's about a self-made millionaire named Jay Gatsby, and it's also about some of the characters around that are exorbitantly wealthy, and it's about social class. It's about the sort of failure of the American dream. And it's just a really interesting text.
Yeah, I think what we'll do right now is we'll go ahead and read that passage aloud, and then we'll go back and apply the Scasny acronym and think about how we can unpack this rich prose fiction text, okay?
Yeah, this passage is about one character in particular named Tom Buchanan, and he is a character of great wealth and privilege that the narrator is visiting. And this is going to be a kind of a portrait of this man.
All right, so the narrator speaks as follows. Her husband, among various physical accomplishments, had been one of the most powerful ends that ever played football at New Haven. A national figure, in a way, one of those men who reached such an acute limited excellence at 21 that everything afterwards savors of anticlimax. His families were enormously wealthy. Even in college, his freedom with money was a matter for reproach. But now he'd left Chicago and come east in a fashion that rather took your breath away. For instance, he brought down a string of polo ponies from Lake Forest. It was hard to realize that a man in my own generation was wealthy enough to do that.
Why they came east? I don't know. They had spent a year in France for no particular reason, and then drifted here and there unrestfully, wherever people played polo and were rich together. This was a permanent move, said Daisy over the telephone, but I didn't believe it. I had no sight into Daisy's heart, but I felt that Tom would drift on forever, seeking a little wistfully for the dramatic turbulence of some irrecoverable football game.
He had changed since his New Haven years. Now he was a sturdy, straw-haired man of 30, with a rather hard mouth and a supercilious manner. Two shining, arrogant eyes had established dominance over his face and gave him the appearance of always leaning aggressively forward. Not even the effeminate swank of his riding clothes could hide the enormous power of that body. He seemed to fill those glistening boots until he strained the top lacing, and you could see a great pack of muscle shifting when his shoulder moved under his thin coat. It was a body capable of enormous leverage, a cruel body.
His speaking voice, a gruff, husky tenor, added to the impression of fractiousness he conveyed. There was a touch of paternal contempt in it, even towards people he liked, and there were men at New Haven who had hated his guts.
Now, don't think my opinion on these matters is final, he seemed to say, just because I'm stronger and more of a man than you.
We were in the same senior society, and while we were never intimate, I always had the impression that he approved of me and wanted me to like him with some harsh, defiant wistfulness of his own.
We talked for a few minutes on the sunny porch.
I got it.
I got a nice place here, he said, his eyes flashing about restlessly.
Turning me around by one arm, he moved a broad, flat hand among the front vista, including in his sweep a sunken Italian garden, a half-acre of deep, pungent roses, and a snub-nosed motorboat that bumped the tide offshore.
It belonged to Domain, the oil man.
He turned me around again, politely and abruptly.
We'll go inside.
And that's Tom Buchanan.
That's Tom Buchanan, a portrait of a very arrogant and dominant man of enormous wealth. So you get the idea of how the F. Scott Fitzgerald really wants to characterize this man, Tom.
Now, Mr. Jaws, I think the best thing to do would be to go ahead and go through the Scasny acronym. I'm going to go ahead and start with setting and identify some things in the passage, and we'll just go through the acronym and see how that comes.
Yeah, what kind of color coded though? So the blue is the setting.
Yeah, so right away we see the words New Haven pop out, and we know that New Haven is a place up in New England. It's a place of great wealth and opulence in this time period, so that signifies that wealth of the New England place. Leaving Chicago and coming east, again, Chicago is an affluent city. We know that his family had great wealth there. They've kind of moved from one pocket of wealth to another, right?
Yeah,
and
just dropping all these terms like Lake Forest. Yeah, so it's like got that kind of East Coast money. If you know the United States, that East Coast kind of Long Island kind of feel to it, and that's a big part of the text. And then at the end of the passage, we see this sort of rich description of Tom's house. We see the sunken Italian garden.
Kind of like your sunken Italian.
I don't have that. I don't have that. Yeah, the pungent roses, and then the motorboat that bumped offshore.
So obviously the idea here is the setting is connecting to this idea of great wealth and opulence. We see that clearly. What's next in Scasny?
That's character. And there's a lot of character. There's a lot we can talk about, but I think we have certain words that sort of stand out to us. We're talking about him being powerful as a football player, and just that connection of football as like an aggressive, dominant sport. I think that's interesting.
Yeah,
that's characterizing him.
Building on that power, we see that reference to the sturdy, straw-haired man of 30 with the hard mouth, right? So again, the narrator and Fitzgerald, they're really presenting Tom as a really powerful masculine figure.
Yeah, and supercilious means like snobby and superior. So he's got this air of superiority.
Well, and he's going to lean aggressively forward because that's what somebody with that supercilious air of superiority does, right?
Yeah, and he's powerful. He's got a powerful body, and it's a cruel body. You know, a body can't be cruel, but that's an interesting...
So it's a matching voice, right? The gruff, husky tenor. I think that's cool. It just kind of matches this powerful man.
It's kind of how you were reading it, too. You were reading it.
I read it the way the narrator told me to read it.
Yeah, so we want to think about how this man, Tom, is being characterized here. This is the very rich part of the path.
Okay, the A of Scasny, of course, is the actions. Mr. Jaws, what color refers to the actions, and what do we notice?
Yeah, that's great. And what's interesting is that this is mostly a descriptive passage. There's not a lot of action just happening in the passage itself. We know that there's some action about how them moving east. We see some of them like going on a trip to Paris.
But the subtle actions really are important, especially as we... go ahead, take the first one.
Yeah, so we see that there are some previous actions about them spending some time in France and moving east, and those are some previous actions from the passage.
Yeah, again, all connecting the idea of wealth. Like we're just floating around the world, moving to Paris in the 1920s. Like, yeah, that shows a lot of freedom and ability to move around.
And then in the passage itself, well, he's a narrator.
The narrator saying, we talked, which of course is just simply describing the conversation. But I love the line, turning me around by one arm. Mr. Giles, for me, I think that really insinuates his power, Tom's willingness and his desire to control. If I grab you by the arm and turn you, don't touch me either. He's controlling the conversation. Then at the end, he turned me around again. It's like Tom is sort of a puppeteer manipulating the whole story.
That's right. So that's that. I think like zeroing in on that action is really interesting. Okay, What else do we have? We have action, and then we have style. Of course, F. Scott Fitzgerald has a very rich style, so we can talk about a lot of things. Just some things that I noticed that are really interesting. We got really interesting sort of word choice about how they would drift. The word drift is they're kind of like, just kind of carelessly going through life because they have so much money.
Yeah. And something that pops out at me is the two shining, arrogant eyes. We know that eyes are quite important in this novel anyway. We've got Tom's eyes here, and that, again, the way they're shining is almost that arrogance.
And the eyes have dominance over his face. It's almost like they're personified. These eyes have like such dominance. Right. And then we have the imagery of the pack of muscles shifting when his shoulder moved under his coat. No. Okay.
Yeah, so we do get imagery, get a really good, description of this character, okay? What are we moving to next in Scasny?
That would be
narrative perspective.
Narrative perspective. This is very important in The Great Gatsby. If you look at it, it's a first-person narrator.
Take a stab at it. What do you know?
Yeah. So, I'm looking at the narration, and that would be in purple. We know that he says, "Why they came east, I don't know." So he is reflecting on what he knows and what he doesn't know, and we know that his viewpoint, the narrator, is coloring this whole description of Tom.
Well,
that's important.
Can I pull another one? Down toward the bottom, it says, "I always had the impression that he approved of me and wanted me to like him." Again, that's narrative perspective. What can we glean from this right here, Mr. Giles?
Well, yeah, it's his relationship to Tom that he approved of me. So we see maybe that the narrator is a little bit, maybe he wants his approval. And there's that relationship.
Okay, the last thing, of course, of Scasny is the ideas. Mr. Giles, we've talked about it, we've alluded to it already, but what are some of the ideas that are just pervasive in this passage?
Wealth. There's so much about wealth. There's so much about the idea of his family was enormously wealthy. He says it's hard for me to realize that a man of his own generation was wealthy enough to do that. So they're not just rich, but they are filthy rich. And they're like, they have so much money that they're almost...
And you can almost highlight words like wealth and rich and synonyms of those and just draw a line right through the passage. It's just threaded throughout the passage. That's what the narrator wants to emphasize.
The other thing is dominance and power, right? There's a lot of references to like the dominance and power that Tom Buchanan exudes, right? And so that's part of the passage as well.
Okay, folks, we hope that in the end you understand how this acronym Scasny can help you unpack and decipher prose fiction. By applying this acronym, you can find rich meaning and deep understandings and insight in your analysis. Thanks for watching the channel, and please come back again for more on this text type.
Thanks, guys.